My special guest today is with the University of Johannesburg. He recently published an article entitled Imagining the Diaspora Vote from Zimbabweans Abroad, Electronic Voting or Postal Voting. This article can be accessed on International Journal of Innovation, Creativity and Change, Volume 15, Issue number 2, that I'm going to paste the link in the description panel on the upload for this video and in the comment sections right on our Facebook page. Dr. Limukani, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ano Tida. Thanks so much.
I do like your article so much. I've read it a couple of times. I was working on an article recently for a newspaper that I write for, and I wanted to write about the diaspora vote. I was following the news closely, and I saw that in as much as 2023 elections are concerned, it's now clear and it's now obvious that the diaspora vote is not going to be operationalized. And there were basically three arguments that were advanced by the government through ZANU-PF's political commissar, Patrick Chinamasa. He argued that the diaspora vote cannot be operationalized because of three fundamental points. It's very difficult for the vote to be enfranchised because Zimbabweans living in the diaspora are normally misinformed about the situation back home, and it's highly likely that they can vote naively and decide on the future of a country that they're not staying, a country that they don't have a lived experience of. Secondly, he was arguing that enfranchising the diaspora vote is going to outcompete the ruling party, that is ZANU-PF, in the polls, because many of ZANU-PF's officials are under sanctions, the travel sanctions, and they cannot travel to countries like the United States and other specific Western European countries. Because of that, it's argued that they cannot go and campaign, they cannot go and link up with their voters and organize. So it will be unfair for the diaspora vote to be enfranchised given that. And lastly, he argued that economically it can be exhaustive to budgets because operationalizing the diaspora vote encompasses a whole lot of things. And in as much as the budgets and the monies that are involved at this point in time, up to 2023, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission does not have the capacity to raise such amounts of money so that they can operationalize the vote. But now I read your paper. You bring up this idea that it is possible. You actually provide the possibility that a diaspora vote can be initiated, it can be legislated, and it can be operationalized by two means: electronic voting or postal voting. I want you to take me through the core ideas of your article and what you consider to be its central argument as you articulate the major findings of your research.
Actually, if you look into my article, I touch on the issue of the government having several factors to consider enfranchising the immigrants. So it's actually the diaspora vote. It is not an international legal obligation for the government to consider, but it's a discretionary act. You get what I'm trying to say? So what happens is the government of Zimbabwe has to consider the diaspora vote, or they cannot even consider it at all. But the point is, there are many factors to actually look at on the ground. Number one is that we have got so many Zimbabweans out of the country. Approximately 4 million, 5 million, you get the point, considering those who are also undocumented. But at the end of the day, if you look into my article, I argue about the theory of diffusion or emulation of diaspora enfranchisement norms, because other countries are doing it.
Yeah,
also consider that they are expatriates to vote. So they have, but now it depends on the electoral system, because some electoral systems are actually difficult to come up with models for diaspora vote, while others are actually quite easier to do so. So if you look into my article, I touch African countries which extended the voting rights to diasporas. That's Mozambique, South Africa, I think Namibia. So with South Africa, it's quite easy because you don't vote a candidate, you vote a party, political party. That's the electoral system. So if you are in another country, you can just vote ANC or you vote EFF or DA. It's quite easier because the electoral system allows them to do so. But with ours in Zimbabwe, it's difficult because you have to be domiciled in that constituency because it's a constituency-based vote. You see, and if it's a councillor, it's a ward-based vote. So if Zimbabwe has to implement a diaspora vote, then how are we going to come up with constituencies or to set up polling stations? So that's my argument there. And then I say that I actually say that it's actually easier now to consider the presidential vote rather than the constituency one. Because if we are to come up with constituencies, then we have to come up with constituencies in those countries which diasporas are.
On that note, so what you're simply saying is highly likely and possible for the diaspora vote to be operationalized at a presidential election rather than a constituency-based election.
Constituency-based election is actually it's harder to implement the constitution compared to the presidential one, because if let's say we want the Zimbabweans here in South Africa to vote, and then how are we going to allocate them to their constituencies? For example, myself, I come from my tabulated north, and then my constituency is Wange West. So then we have to come up with all those Zimbabweans who are in South Africa who come from Wange West to vote. And then, so it's going to be very costly and expensive to put them and allocate them in their constituencies. From back or home, I'm not going to say, because they have to vote for those candidates, those members of parliament. And then, but it's easier now if you say all Zimbabweans come and vote for a president. Because either we are voting ZANU-PF, Mnangagwa, or
he doesn't have a constituency.
He doesn't have a constituency. But now, remember my conclusion in my article. I touch on political will. I say that, like what I said when I started, I said that it's not the right to vote is not absolute. You see, it's not an international legal obligation that the ZANU-PF government should consider. That they are not supposed to be forced to consider. So it's by choice that they do so, considering economic factors, considering political factors. You see, so like what if you look into my analysis, I say that some tyrannic governments do block the diaspora vote because it's assumed that those in diaspora most of the times are opposition. So like what you said, that Chinamasa said that these people in diaspora, they are not well linked to what is happening back home, and which means that most of them, they are anti ZANU-PF. So the government of Zimbabwe is afraid to implement it, the diaspora vote. But if it was not so, maybe they would, you see. And then but remember, the international community is also giving pressure to this government to implement the diaspora vote, because it's about diffusion. Because remember, in 2016 and 2017, it's when these guys, the diasporans, went back home and challenged the court to say, why are we still excluded from the right to vote? Because they were learning from outside, and they are seeing other countries are implementing it. So at the end of the day, the government of Zimbabwe is being pressured to implement the diaspora vote. But now it's a political game, because they have to consider, because at the end of the day, they cannot allow 4 million diasporas to vote through knowing that most of them they left the country due to political and economic challenges.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can say.
Yeah.
So So they left the country due to political and economic challenges. So by that fact, ZANU-PF it will take time for them to enfranchise the diasporas and give them the right to vote, because they would actually back up by this argument that is the right to vote is not absolute, and then because they have to also make sure that they amend the Electoral Act, you see, to include such provisions for the diaspora. But and they've got a majority in parliament, so at the end of the day, they can only implement what goes right with them. So that's the challenge we are having in Zimbabwe. That's the challenge in Zimbabwe.
Now, looking at these two options that we have, that you talk about in this article, electronic voting or postal voting, who gets to vote in this election? Because we of the 5 million Zimbabweans living in the diaspora that we always talk about, what can we say about the eligibility of these people to cast a vote? Because we have documented people and undocumented people. And if we are going to follow a formal channel of registering people and getting them to cast their vote either via embassies or to post it via embassies or via institutions of government or international multilateral kind of organizations, it's obviously going to need these people living in these countries to be properly documented immigrants of that country, and of which we know that some of the Zimbabweans that stay in different parts of the world, some of them are not documented. So is that not one of the limiting factors to voting? What would happen to this kind of a scenario?
I don't think that's the cause why ZANU-PF is not willing to implement the diaspora vote, because remember, there are different models in which we can consider enfranchising the diasporas. Number one, we have mentioned the electronic voting. The electronic voting is there are certain means of making sure that we block the hacking, because technology is also advancing, but it's very expensive. That's what I argue there. That considering that for us to establish the electronic voting system is very expensive, especially for Zimbabwe. And given the fact that Zimbabweans are also scattered in diaspora, and then voting from wherever you are in my own house, while we have got issues at home, like what I said, I mentioned that we have internal issues at home. The elections at home are still said to be not free.
Very controversial. Before the diaspora vote comes.
So you get the point. So now the political factors on ground are actually challenging to even talk about the electronic diaspora vote. You see. So hence I opted for the postal vote in my article. I say that since we have got embassies wherever we are, myself and South Africa, there's an embassy in Johannesburg. So the government of Zimbabwe would allow us to go vote there at the embassy, because remember, postal voting, I can vote in my own house. It is not actually you don't need to be assisted to do so. You just vote and then you post. You see. So I suggested that they must combine the personal voting and postal, because personal voting is when you need someone to actually guide or witnesses to see if I really voted. You see, that's personal. So we need witnesses like election agents, where we can go to an embassy group there. I don't know how many of us will be there. Then we vote. You see, and then I suggested that, and then the embassy will take the ballot papers first before they post them back for home, because of the rigging issues. I mean the alleged rigging issues. They are supposed to count them there at the embassy.
At the embassy, yeah.
Yes, they count the votes at the embassy. After counting the votes at the embassy, then they send the samples. I mean the residue back home. You see, to say that, no, these are the results we came up with. So there is the residue. So that's postal, then they send the back home the ballots so that they go and verify you see, at least now we know that there is in Johannesburg, ZANU-PF garnered 13,000 and the MDC garnered so, you see. So at the end of the day, and then when they get there in Harare or whatever, they're going to be counted the residue. Then it has to tally with what was found. So because I said, and as much as we would go electronic, it's a rhetoric in the fact that we have got so many electoral challenges back home.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You're voting there in states, wherever in your studio, there going on the computer, you see, verifying, because remember you have to be registered voter, and then there must be some biometric key if they want to sort of like block some hacking, so that they can also combine with the blockchain. Some technologies. Blockchain is a decentralized system where third parties can also monitor these votes. But at the end of the day, it's very expensive. It will take time given the Zimbabwean situation. So going for the postal through embassies is actually preferable.
It's a way to go. Yeah.
A way to go. Yeah. That is my argument.
The postal vote can be casted through the embassies. And electronic vote can also be initiated, but it has its own challenges. Now, given the fact that Zimbabwe as a country, it doesn't have good international relations with some other countries. On several occasions, there have been some exchanges between ambassadors of Zimbabweans to other countries, and even ambassadors of some other countries to Zimbabwe, to such an extent that the credibility and the integrity of our elections, if we are to go the postal route, is solely dependent on the relations that we have with those given countries, because we will be entrusting our faith into the embassies of other countries, and not necessarily the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. We have a whole bigger problem here of trying to legislate this, because constitutionally it's ZEC that has got the authority to conduct these elections. So it has to be a ZEC initiative that is conducted through the embassies, but by ZEC. What are the possibilities of, let's talk about social media campaigning, or given the fact that some party officials cannot travel to some other countries because of sanctions? It might be expensive for them to travel to each and every country that a Zimbabwean is, so that they can campaign. What possibilities are there that social media can actually be fully operationalized as the official means of reaching out to the voters? Yeah,
you raise another point. Before we talk about social media, I want to touch on the issue of ZEC. Remember, we do have diaspora vote. Partly, this is only for government officials. Government officials out of the country are allowed.
And how is this initiated? Can you just tell me, how do they cast it? It's obviously postal, right?
It's postal, yes. They vote wherever they are.
And it's done through the embassies?
No. Whatever you are, as long as you're an official, if anyone tell you can just vote.
Okay. Oh, now I see.
Yeah. Because this is not personal voting where you need witnesses. Postal, most of the time you don't need witnesses, so you can vote as an ambassador in Netherlands and send your vote. You see, so remember this ZEC chairperson, she once said that they can consider postal voting for those who are registered voters in Zimbabwe, which means that you have to go back home and get registered.
And register, yeah.
So they were saying that maybe they'll consider not only for officials, but for those expatriates who have left the country, and then maybe they can just take that vote and do postal voting from wherever they are. But she was just talking at the end of the day, all these things at the beginning parliament, they begin from the Electoral Act, amendment of the Electoral Act in etc.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's from the Electoral Act to ZEC. So the point here is going to talk about social media. Diasporas, they are more exposed to technologies compared to those who are back home. Yes, if you check Twitter, if you go on Zimbabwean Twitter, most of them, they are in diaspora. You see, they've got access to social media technologies.
Yeah.
You see, yeah, because because remember, diaspora is the one that is sending remittances back home. So there are actually few factors that the government of Zimbabwe should consider if they want to move on and develop Zimbabwe. Number one, that most of the diasporas, they are the ones who are helping Zimbabwe economically right now.
That's true.
Actually extending the right to vote to diasporas to develop Zimbabwe, because they will actually motivate the Zimbabweans back home, I mean in diaspora, to be more patriotic and to act in Zimbabwean politics. Number two, you touched the issue of international relations. You see, yes, if Zimbabwe is going to say, no, we have extended the right to our Zimbabweans in the host countries, you see, that is also going to sort of like promote good relations with those host countries, to say that, you know, Zimbabwe has actually decided to move on. So this other scholar talks about a simulacrum that these despotic governments, they do implement a simulacrum of democracy, sort of like to please the neighboring countries that
they are democratic.
Yet they are not, because at the end of the day, they can try to manipulate these democratic practices. So the point is that diasporas have got more access to technology. They are exposed in those developed countries or better countries, wherever they are. Because when you are living in your country, you cannot live going to a country which is bad, actually, and more underdeveloped than yours.
Yeah.
You see, so they go to better countries where they see some other countries implementing electoral policies which are much better than theirs. Then they go back home to actually sort of like challenge the government to democratic. You see, so that's how we talk about the diffusion of emulation of diaspora enfranchisement norms. We say that the immigrants, they transfer ideas from one country to another, saying
to another,
guys, because you see, so technologically, given the social media network, diasporas are more exposed than those who are back home, because Zimbabwe is largely rural. Released earlier last year. So Zimbabwe is largely rural. You get the point. So at the end of the day, implementing also electronic voting in Zimbabwe is challenging, because very few people can afford to
cast.
You see, electronically, because the country is largely rural, and the electricity problems, you see. So social media, if you see, if towards elections, you'll find that there's a lot of noise on social media, but that does not guarantee that there's a lot of noise on ground. You get the point. Yeah, if we here on social media, I can access, I've got Wi-Fi, but someone who is in Murewa, there in rural areas, no access to Wi-Fi.
That's true.
Then someone assumes that no, there's chaos in Zimbabwe, or because he's seen it on social media. But when you go on ground, you find that ZANU-PF is kind of popular. Because if you talk about polarization is when that you have got a large number which is opposite, and then a large number which is also for the ruling party. At the end of the day, it's parallel, because when you talk about parallel, which means that it does not mean that the other one is more popular than the other, or the other one is. So it's a parallel. You get the point. That's why we talk about that the only solution for Zimbabwe is consensus, coming together and build a government of national unity, because we cannot say that ZANU-PF is going to be removed, or you see, because at the end of the day, there's a lot on ground, the main factors on ground, which really tamper with our democratic processes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Limukani. Viewers and listeners, this was Dr. Limukani Mathe. He is with the University of Johannesburg, and his article, Imagining the Diaspora Vote from Zimbabweans Abroad, Electronic Voting versus Postal Voting, can be accessed on the link that I'm going to paste in the description panel on the upload for this video and in the comment sections on our Facebook page. This article appeared in Volume 15, Issue number 2 of the International Journal of Innovation, Creativity, and Change. Dr. Limukani, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Anotida.
I'm happy to have heard you. Have a good day.
Thank you.